Um, so I am Maciej Wyrodek. I work at Objectivity, and today I am here to talk how does Selenium find elements. Probably you are asking yourself why. Well, you have some ideas why, because you are here, why it will be useful for you. For me, what took me on this journey is the saying of my father. He always says that, do you know what makes difference between technician and engineer? Technician is someone who knows how to do stuff. He was learned how to resolve problems, how to use tools, but he doesn't know how those tools work. When there is a problem that there is no troubleshooting guide for, usually they are stuck. Engineer has knowledge of the science that is behind the mechanism. So even when he has the problem without any solution, he can create one from the basics. And that's why we need to know the basics, because I'm quite sure nobody here in this room has a title of software testing technician. You are probably testers, engineer, or analyst. All those titles requires from us one skill, problem solving. And to do that, we need knowledge. And I'm here to give you some knowledge. The story starts in 2014. I was leaving one of the company, and my last work there was to prepare the proof of concept of test automation. The guy who was taking the job over me, well, he didn't like my approach. He said, let's move every selector to the XPath. My reaction was, what? Why? I see quite a lot of problems with this, because before I was able to finish, he said to me, they all work the same in the end, and XPath is giving us the most abilities. Back then, I didn't caught the contradiction here, because how it can give you most capabilities if it's work exactly the same? Well, I was taught this way. Start with IDs. If you cannot use IDs, use classes and names. If that doesn't work, go for CSS. And then, when everything else fails, run or use XPath. Well, some people say that use link text also, but I'm not sure if that should be the last option. I would prefer it before the XPath. And so we had the issue. So we do what every tester do. We decided to try to test it. So we wrote some code. Is it visible? Yeah, it is visible. Basically, this is not the code we wrote back then. Back then, we had much more time, and it was already using the framework we set up. The goal was simple, to check how long the different locator takes to find the element. We weren't measuring exactly performance. The performance was the indicator that if it's similar, it means they all work the same. If it's different, it means there is some issues that it's working differently. Basically, this code is very simple. It has one method that takes different locators, and using them, it's trying to measure the time. Basically, it starts the stopwatch before every iteration. It takes how long it found the element, and then it stops measuring and adding it to list. Lately, it's running, then writing this all to the document. This is simplified version, because there is much more issues here. In reality, there is question what kind of locator you are using, because simple is definitively going faster than most complicated one. There is also a question what you should be using. Are you using the version that is offline, that is on your computer? How big is the site? There is so many parameters here that from performance point of view, this test is not really good. But it was there to give us some input into what's going on behind the stages. And we give it a few more seconds to finish. OK, it's done all of them. First thing, what we can notice here, the time differences is not big. There are very few differences in the time right now. It wasn't the case back then. In 2014, the difference was much bigger. So let's look into the file. Give me a second. Ah, something went wrong. much better. Basically, I am measuring in the milliseconds the average time to find elements. The time is not much different between all of those tests. Right now, there is not much difference. If you know performance, you probably will tell me, dude, you are using 100% of results. You should be doing some percentiles and that stuff. But it's not the goal here. The goal is here to see what's actually happening. The time right now, thanks to the changes in the browsers, are much more similar, but there are some still small differences. Oh. Unfortunately, my friend wasn't convinced. He started to whine. There is still too many parameters to change. There is still so many variables there. Everything can go wrong. I'm not convinced. So we need to go deeper. We need to see what's happening inside. This time we're going to use Postman because we can, and it's fun. First, when you launch the Chrome driver, basically what is happening, on your computer, the Chrome driver server is active. It's now waiting for the request which your code makes. But you can make the same request using Postman. Question, are you seeing it okay? Should I enlarge it? Okay. So first thing what you have to do, you have to make a request that will create you a session. What you see? The browser was opened. And in the response, I got the ID. The ID is important because it's a REST API. It's stateless. It doesn't care about me. If I want to do something with it, I have to provide information what I want to do. And in this case, I want to say it which browser we'll be using. We will be using the one that is under this ID. So, for example, in this case, if I want to go to my website, which is on my computer because I'm not using internet here, then I have to make the call to that session. Let's make sure if I put the right one. And say, go to URL. As you can see, we went to the page. Give me a moment. I will replace the URLs in all of the others. So, now, if you want to find button, we have to say to it a few things. What kind of locator we are using, in this case ID, and what is its value, the button ID. Now, the interesting thing is the return. As you can see, I didn't get any information. I got only some ID. So, if you ever wondered why when you are debugging your Selenium code, you have to wait for all the information to come, it's this. Because the element is not having them. It has to call every single property to get. So if we want to find the element, the text of the element, now we have to use a little more complicated request. We have to put the information about the session and the information about the ID of the element. And now it returns as the text. Probably most of you have seen the stale element exception. This is the reason, because the element was refreshed and its ID has changed. So it no longer knows what element you are calling. This is the issue. Last stuff is we can close the session. And now it's closed. Okay, what's going on inside of the code of the browser? The Selenium that you are using. When you're using WebDriver, it's basically using, sorry, let's start on the bottom. It's basically calling remote WebDriver. This is the base for all the drivers we are using. And here we have a find element method. Which basically is not, I took the wrong one, sorry. It's basically using find element, which is calling different mechanism. And when you go through all of this, it finally will go to something that is called that is using the proper interface. In this case, it's using iFind by ID, which again, it's implemented in the remote WebDriver. And here we have the method that we were seeing at the beginning. Difference is, as you can see, it's using here a CSS selector. We are using ID. This is because of the Selenium 4 that is coming soonish. It was supposed to be here last year, but it's still not here. There are alphas right now. Back then, not too long ago, it was looking a little different. If you were using the specification compliant mode, then it was using CSS selector. And if you were using other options, it was using findelement. At the beginning, it was only using findelement by ID. Now it's replaced with CSS selector. At this point, my friend said, okay, I give up. You are right, it's doing different things. But what we know is how Selenium works. We know what Selenium is asking of WebDriver. But how does it find the element? We have no idea yet. And I tried to see, oh, sorry, that wasn't work. I was trying to find what's happening in the Chrome driver code. Here is the problem. I am not fluent in C++. I had it on my studies. I can write simple programs, but the stuff they are doing here is quite above my pay grade. But after some looking, I managed to find the method that is responsible for finding elements. The thing that caught my attention first is, again, the W3C compliance mode that is mentioned here. And what's going bottom down, then is using some atoms. At this point, I knew one thing. I'm lacking in theory. I don't know enough about what's going on behind the scenes to give you proper answer. So, unfortunately, it's the time of theory. Oh, it took time. Oh, now. So, I hope you haven't go to sleep yet, because this is the boring part. This is the part that will put you to sleep. We have nice dark room, so nice night for you. In 2004, a guy called Huggins created Selenium. Basically, it was a dark time. The empire called Internet Explorer was the dominant force in the universe. Basically, Internet Explorer 6 was the most popular browser back then, but the small river falls called Firefox started to get dominance in the field. It was still small, but big enough that developers had to start to take notice of it. JSON was in the project in ThoughtWorks that had an issue with it. Basically, they didn't have tools. The problem was their unit tests were working okay, but when they fixed something in one browser, it was breaking in the another. So he did what every lazy developer does. Instead of hiring some testers and doing manual testing, he said, I will spend half a year of my life to create a tool that will do it for me. And this is how the Selenium was created. Basically, as he stated it himself, Selenium started as the tool by developer, for developers, and it is basically developer tool. JSON is a little sour lately because this is basically mantra that Cypress is using. Cypress is saying, no, we are real developer tools. We are not that pesky tester device like Selenium. Why Selenium? Because Selenium is a cure for Mercury poisoning. Back then, the most popular automation tool at the market was one done by Mercury Interactive. Probably none of you have heard about this company, because I haven't heard until I was making the research. But you know the tool. HP have bought them and renamed the tool Quick Test Professional. Probably some of you here had to use that in past. And how the Selenium was working in the version 1? Basically, you had your code, and you were also deploying the server. The server was launching the browsers and injecting something called Selenium Core, which contained atoms, into the browser. the issue here was the cross-site scripting. That was a big issue that blocked a lot of possible testing there. At that time, another guy in the ThoughtWorks, Simon Stewart, started another project. He called it WebDriver. Another important name, because if you are using test doubles, you have mocks, you have fakes, you have stubs, and you have drivers. If your code is working on something, is acting on something, and is expecting some response, you can replace that element with the stub. So basically, when your code acts on something, it will get canned response. When your code is the one that is acted upon, and you want to replace that part that is acting, that's the driver. In this case, we are replacing human that is browsing the web. That's why it's called WebDriver. Simon wanted to put the pressure on the browser developers so they would provide the mechanism for the automation. He wanted to put just a standard that each developer will be keeping. Fortunately for him, the atoms were a good point to start. Simon met with the JSON at the GTalk 2007. They had a nice presentation called Knife Fight in the Steel Cage, when each of them was giving arguments for the other's product and showing the weakness of his products. That was the beginning of working together, which led to joining both projects into one. The Selenium WebDriver, it was called the Selenium ToE. Again, it kept the best of both worlds. It kept the nice bindings for the browsers that came with Selenium. It got a nice API that came with the WebDriver. The API we're using before, that was the API that WebDriver was made for. And the communication with the browsers using server, that was kinda from Selenium. But here was the part that came from WebDriver. You don't care how the driver talks with the browser. This is not on you. This is on the browser provider. They have to keep the driver working. And to make that, they need a standard. And that standard is W3C. But I think you can see one thing here already. Selenium doesn't find elements. Selenium politely asks browser to provide them. But still, we don't know how does it happen. And I have bad news for you. We have to go deeper. We have to go into the world of documentation. I am dyslexic. I was studying computer science, and I had a lot of math. My biggest issue was all the theorems or the theoretical documents. They were too hard for me to read. I couldn't process them. And this is giving me flashbacks to that time. Just listen to this sentence. The find element command is used to find an element in the current browser context that can be used as the web element context for the future element-centric commands. A mouthful. What does it say? If you find element, you can use element. The issue here is, this is documentation. This has to have one and only one interpretation. It's exactly like legal document. You have to use it properly. You have to understand it in one way, even if that understanding will come after some time. And the documentation has this table, the Locator strategies. What kind of keywords are supported and what version what they are doing. As you can see, ID is not here. ID is not part of the standard. The same for the name and class name. The standard is also saying what's happening under the hood. Basically, what's happening, we are calling the DOM method, the DOM, domain object model method called query selector all, and it's doing all the work there. Sorry. And the same happens for the link and partial link text. The difference is only tag name, which is using get element by tag name, and XPath selector, which is using a mechanism called evaluate, which is special mechanism created for XPaths. Basically, it has its own big documentation. So now we can understand this code. If you are in the W3C compliant mode, if you are not using one of the strategies, the stuff will fail. This is important because when Selenium 4 will come around, the ID won't be supported. When you use ID, the driver won't know what to do. So as the solution for it, the guys decided to do a seamless transition. So not to break your code, in different places, the mechanisms are replaced. For example, as you can see in Selenium, in the C# in the moment, that was the way. But I was still not sure. This is the way I was taught, and I couldn't find why this order. Who come up with this and why? To be honest, I haven't managed to come to conclusion why and how. I know a few things. The ID is the recommendation by both Simon Stewart and Jason Huggins. The XPath, they are saying, is the last result. Basically, they are saying, if you want to use XPath, think twice if this is the option that you want to go with. Because it's the most dangerous one, the most slowest one, and the easiest to break. So, going forward, we have our architecture here. The JSON Wire protocol is going to be replaced. Oh, sorry. The atoms that we were talking before, they have their representation in the protocol. There is all of this option working. But this is going away. At some point in time, I think it's already happening. This is will be replaced with WebDriver Wire protocol, sometimes called W3C Wire protocol, and it won't have the options to call ID. And that time, if I would do a request for ID, I would probably get an error. Okay, but I am quite deep into this stuff, and I still haven't gave you an answer. What's going on down there? Here is the problem. I have showed you the code for the Chrome. I told you I'm not fluent enough to understand it. I gave my try to Firefox, and they are using Rust, which is even more arcane than the C++. But there are a few important things here. The Chrome DevTools protocol and Marionette. Basically, Chrome has its own protocol. This is the protocol that is used by DevTools. If you click F12, this is the protocol that the DevTools are talking with the browser. This is the protocol that Puppeteer and Cypress are using. They are basically using this stuff, and that's why they don't need the WebDriver. They are completely switching off that part. There is no server in the middle. That's why both of those tools are much faster, and that's why both of these tools are only supporting for now Chrome and other WebKit-based browsers. I heard that the Puppeteer is trying to make implementation for Marionette, but I don't know the current state of this process. And I tried to find more information on this. I went to my friend, who is front-end developer. I asked him, you know, you have to understand this stuff, because we are now in DOM. We are now in your domain. So, do you know how this stuff works? He looked at me, he slapped me once, he slapped me twice, and then said, dude, nobody cares anymore. At this point, the standard is at this level, all browsers are working the same for this stuff. I told him, I don't believe you. He said to me, you know, there is that nice page called, can I use it? Just go there and take a look. So, I did what he said. I went to the Can I Use It page, and I took a look. Basically, outside of the Internet Explorer 8, which I hope nobody of you have to support anymore. If you have, my condolences. It has a full support for the query selector method. The same is for the tag. The difference is for the XPath. We'll go about XPath in a few moments later. Okay. So at this point, I was like that. Okay, so I know everything is following the standard. I know I am not good enough to check in the code how it works. So what's going on in the documentation for this standard? Because DOM is also a standard. Fortunately for us, DOM was written by much more human people than the Selenium stuff, and it's much easier to understand. Basically, what they are saying here is the query selector all. It's doing this. It's trying to parse the selectors. If it won't be able to parse it, it will throw error. If not, it will return the element that matches the context. How the parser works? Now we are in something that is called formal languages. This is the word of the compilers. What you need to know is basically WSPIC. What you see is what you get. So if you know how the parser works, so if you know what should be happening when you are using different selectors, the results of the compiler will be the same. I'm not going to go any deeper because I'm not mad. And what about XPath? XPath is an interesting case. Internet Explorer, even in the latest version, is not supporting XPath. Probably if you were using the Internet Explorer, you had to write some XPaths and they are working. So the question is how it's happening. They are using, again, still injection of the browser, of the scripts. They are injecting the library that is presenting the XPath support for the Internet Explorer. Here are two problems. Problem one, it's very slow. XPath on the Internet Explorer is slow. The second problem is the implementation is not ideal. There are some known bugs there that in few cases it won't work properly. I won't go into the XPath. This is the word that is very complex. There is lots of options there. There is lots of stuff to do it. This is the place when our journey is coming to close. Basically, Selenium has to go through the many layers. What you are getting is basically DOM, but it's going through lots and lots of layers. Why it's happening? Because every browser is different, every browser is working differently, and those layers of abstraction are needed so you could get it working from the same code. The goal is to have one code and just ability to switch the browser in your code, and everything else should still be working. Of course, it's not always as easy. Different browsers have different options to use, and those different options have also different settings. But the beauty of this solution is if you send requests with the options that are unknown to the browser will just ignore those settings. So my friend was wrong at that time, but currently he's more and more right because more of those stuff is using the same methods. Selenium doesn't find elements. Selenium is asking for them. And after we take all this stuff, what we are getting is just DOM. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Okay, so right now it's a time for your questions. And they are some. We're gonna select 3 of them. 3 the best. The best one will be, where are your shoes?
Well, I had to pay somehow for the transport here. I'm from Wrocław.
Okay, and the second question, please. What is entry point for someone new to start testing as it is on presentation?
Oh God, this is okay, little shameless advertising. I'm currently writing a post for my blog about how to start the stuff. My most close advice for you is ignore automation. Go for the programming because automation is built on the programming. If you don't understand the simple concept, if you don't understand how the language works, how to write simple programs in that language, there is no point with the writing code for the automation because basically, this is another library that is using that language. So if you won't be able to use that, if you don't be able to understand the simple concept there, it will take you a long, long time before you learn anything. So go for the programming, go for the basics of the testing, then start looking into the automation.
Okay, fair enough. So the last question, the third question, let's see. At some point, you mentioned Cypress. How do you feel about this framework when compared to Selenium? Is it better in any way?
No. Basically, Cypress is trying to solve different problem. Cypress is trying to solve problem that Selenium was fixing at the beginning. Basically, it's a tool for developers who write the front end to give them ability to test their stuff. Cypress is not cross-browser automation. Cypress is only taking care of the testing of in that one browser, which is Chrome. And another thing is Cypress still has a lot of problems. One of them is Microsoft single sign-on. Basically, Microsoft is saying there is no problem on our side. Cypress is saying it's problem of the Microsoft. And it's not working. People are using some strange mechanism like using Puppeteer to log into the page and then using Cypress to control it at this point. But in my opinion, if you already have to use Puppeteer, then stay with Puppeteer. There is a nice article, I don't remember the link. The blog is called Watermelon, and the guy had a deep dive into different issues with the Cypress. I recommend looking into it.
Okay, I think it's a really
We have a
nice.
few more minutes, so we can go for another question if there is something else there.
Okay, so one more, the fourth question. How long does it take to start everything from scratch?
Define everything. We are talking about the automation, starting the project from the start, or are we talking about learning how to write automation?
Mateusz, yes?
Okay, I understand. So basically the question is, if I understand correctly, we have the page to test, we have everything, we have option to do that, but we have to set up the frameworks, select the tools, and that kind of stuff. Depends. In bigger companies, usually you have either some internal libraries that are prepared to help you to bootstart with different solution. If you would have to start from complete start, there is a lot of decision to make first. Are we going with the page object pattern? Will we go with screenplay? Are we going to use the Selenium? Are we going to use Puppeteer? Are we going to use Cypress? Are we going to use Kython? There is a lot of selection. To be honest, when you know what you're doing, it's getting shorter, but this is the questions that you have to think about. And in my opinion, usually the most complex part is getting permissions to do stuff, because here you have the environment and you have to explain them why do you need to do that. I would say week at minimum, few months at most. But this is, just the estimate taken like that from the air.
Okay. Do you want one more?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So the next question. Have you considered changing the name of lecture into Świat Selenium?
Good one, good one. I haven't heard that one yet. Well, the problem is TestDive is accepting only name in English, so I couldn't do that.
Next time.
Next time.
Okay, I see that there are some nice questions, so
Okay.
let's take one more.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Have you any experience with run test in a no visual and in order to speed up timer of execution? Have you?
Yeah, basically, Phantom.js is no longer developed. The development of it stopped, I think, last year, so it's no longer an option. This is a plug of different conferences, but at the test camp this year, there was presentation about performance of different browsers in the headless mode. If I remember correctly, the best result they got using Puppeteer with Chrome in headless mode. Selenium in headless mode for Chrome was still fast, definitively faster than the browser without the UI. But the difference wasn't so drastic. It was still visible. What I remember, I think the biggest difference was in the memory usage. They were able to put much more browsers that way on one machine than without using this. And I think the biggest benefit of the headless mode right now is, and I may be wrong here because I haven't done it in a while, is if you set up Docker, is usually the version that doesn't have the UI, the UR elements. So using headless mode, you can run it on those Dockers. And this is one of the biggest benefits of the headless mode right now.
Okay, and we also have right now a little gift, as was mentioned at the very beginning, that for the most interesting questions, we are gonna give a book, and the organizers decided that the third question that was here was done by Mateusz, is winning. So Mateusz, okay, Mateusz is here. The question goes to you, the book goes to you. Could you pass it? Okay. Okay. So that's it, I think, right now.
Okay.
Okay, so big applause. Thank you very, very, very much for this great insight.